Avoidance becomes completely obsessed with people who communicate through subtle implication, understated expression, and emotional sophistication that requires interpretation rather than explicit declaration. This communication format appeals to their psychological need for mystery, intellectual engagement, and emotional safety, while simultaneously triggering their deepest curiosity and desire for connection. The avoidant finds themselves endlessly fascinated by someone who speaks in layers, who conveys profound meaning through carefully chosen words, who expresses vulnerability through strength, and who maintains emotional dignity even during difficult conversations. This communication style creates the perfect psychological storm for avoidant obsession because it provides emotional depth without overwhelming intensity, vulnerability without desperate need, and intellectual stimulation without emotional demands. The avoidant feels safe engaging with this type of communication because it doesn't trigger their defensive systems while simultaneously providing the emotional and intellectual nourishment they secretly crave but rarely find in more direct communication styles. The format that obsesses avoidance involves communication that trusts their intelligence and emotional capacity without explicitly demanding their participation or response. It creates space for their own interpretation and emotional processing while providing enough substance to engage their analytical minds and hearts. This approach allows them to feel seen and understood without feeling pressured or pursued, creating the ideal conditions for their genuine interest and emotional investment to emerge naturally. The art of subtle implication. Avoidants become mesmerized by communication that conveys deep meaning through subtle implication rather than explicit statement. This approach appeals to their need to feel intellectually engaged and emotionally sophisticated while avoiding the anxiety that comes with direct emotional demands or expressions. When someone communicates through thoughtful suggestion rather than obvious declaration, it creates mystery and depth that the avoidant finds irresistible. This subtle communication style might involve sharing observations about life, relationships, or emotions that contain layers of personal meaning without explicitly stating the connection to current circumstances. For example, instead of saying, "I miss you" when you're distant, someone might share thoughts about how certain silences feel different from others, how some absences create presence in their wake, or how connection sometimes grows stronger through space rather than proximity. The power of implication lies in how it respects the avoidant's intelligence and emotional sophistication while creating opportunities for them to engage at their own comfort level. They can choose to recognize the deeper meaning or remain at the surface level without feeling pressured or cornered. This freedom of interpretation makes them more likely to engage authentically rather than defensively. Subtle implication also allows the avoidant to feel like they're discovering meaning rather than having it imposed upon them. This sense of discovery appeals to their need for control and autonomy, while simultaneously providing the emotional connection they crave. They become detectives and participants simultaneously, analyzing layers of meaning while being moved by the emotions those layers convey. The format creates intellectual intimacy that feels safer to avoidance than emotional intimacy, while actually providing both. They engage their analytical minds in understanding the communication, while their hearts respond to the emotions being conveyed indirectly. This dual engagement captures their complete attention in ways that more straightforward communication cannot achieve. Understated emotional expression. Avoidants are drawn to emotional expression that demonstrates depth and authenticity without overwhelming intensity or dramatic presentation. They become obsessed with people who can convey profound feelings through understated language that trusts the power of simple truth over emotional manipulation or overwhelming display. This restraint in emotional expression feels both sophisticated and safe to the avoidant psychology. Understated expression might involve acknowledging difficult emotions with quiet dignity rather than dramatic presentation. Instead of explosive anger, it offers observations about disappointment. Instead of desperate pleas for connection, it shares quiet appreciations for moments of understanding. Instead of demands for reassurance, it expresses gratitude for stability and presence when they occur naturally. This communication format appeals to avoidants because it demonstrates emotional regulation and maturity that they respect and aspire to themselves. They see someone who feels deeply but expresses thoughtfully, who experiences strong emotions but maintains personal dignity, who values connection but doesn't become desperate or clingy in pursuing it. This modeling provides them with examples of healthy emotional expression they've rarely encountered. The understated approach also prevents the avoidant from feeling overwhelmed by their partner's emotional intensity while still providing genuine emotional connection and understanding. They can receive and process the emotional content at their own pace without feeling rushed or pressured to reciprocate immediately. This patience and respect for their processing style makes them more likely to engage emotionally rather than withdraw defensively. Understated emotional expression creates space for the avoidant's own feelings to emerge naturally rather than being crowded out by overwhelming displays from others. When someone expresses emotions with restraint and dignity, it gives the avoidant permission to feel and express their own emotions without fear of being overwhelmed or having to manage someone else's emotional intensity. Intellectual sophistication in emotional conversations. Avoidants become completely captivated by people who can discuss emotions, relationships, and personal experiences with intellectual sophistication that elevates these conversations beyond simple emotional expression into meaningful exploration of human experience. This approach satisfies their need for intellectual stimulation while providing emotional depth and connection. This sophisticated approach might involve discussing relationship dynamics through psychological frameworks, exploring emotional experiences through philosophical perspectives, or examining personal growth through theoretical lenses. The conversation becomes education and connection simultaneously, appealing to the avoidant's love of learning while providing emotional intimacy through shared intellectual exploration. The intellectual sophistication prevents emotional conversations from feeling like therapy sessions or emotional demands, while actually providing deeper understanding and connection than surface-level emotional expression. The avoidant feels respected for their intelligence and analytical capabilities while being invited into emotional territory through pathways that feel comfortable and engaging rather than threatening or overwhelming. This format also allows the avoidant to contribute their own analytical insights and perspectives to emotional discussions rather than simply being expected to share feelings or provide emotional support. They become collaborative partners in understanding relationship dynamics, personal growth, and emotional experiences rather than passive recipients of emotional expression or demands. The intellectual approach creates emotional safety by framing personal experiences within larger contexts of human psychology and relationship dynamics. This broader perspective helps the avoidant feel less exposed and vulnerable while discussing personal experiences because they're participating in universal human exploration rather than simply revealing individual weaknesses or needs. Respect for autonomy in communication. Avoidants become obsessed with communication that consistently respects their autonomy and decision-making capacity without trying to manipulate, pressure, or control their responses. This respectful approach creates psychological safety that allows their genuine interest and emotional investment to emerge naturally rather than being defended against or suppressed. Respectful communication involves sharing thoughts, feelings, and experiences without demanding specific responses or reactions from the avoidant. It trusts their capacity to process information and respond authentically in their own time and way. This trust feels revolutionary to avoidants who are accustomed to feeling pressured or pursued in relationships. The format includes making observations about relationship dynamics or personal experiences without explicitly asking the avoidant to change, respond, or take action. It provides information and perspective while leaving them free to use that information however feels appropriate to them. This freedom removes the defensive pressure that typically causes them to withdraw from emotional conversations. Autonomy respecting communication also involves expressing needs and boundaries without making them demands or ultimatums. It shares what would feel good or helpful while acknowledging the avoidant's right to make their own choices about how to respond. This approach makes them more likely to want to meet needs because they feel chosen rather than coerced. The respectful format consistently demonstrates trust in the avoidant's good intentions and capacity for consideration rather than assuming they need to be convinced or manipulated into caring behavior. This trust in their character and capabilities appeals to their sense of integrity and makes them want to live up to the positive assumptions being made about them. Strategic vulnerability and strength. Avoidants are mesmerized by people who can be vulnerable while maintaining personal strength, who can share struggles without becoming victims, who can admit limitations without losing dignity. This combination of vulnerability and strength creates the perfect formula for avoidant fascination because it demonstrates that emotional openness doesn't require weakness or manipulation. Strategic vulnerability involves sharing personal struggles, fears, or limitations in ways that demonstrate self-awareness and personal responsibility rather than seeking rescue or excessive sympathy. It shows the person working through their challenges rather than being overwhelmed by them, processing their emotions rather than being controlled by them. This approach appeals to avoidants because it demonstrates that vulnerability can coexist with strength and independence. They see someone who faces their emotional reality without being destroyed by it, who asks for support without becoming dependent, who shares struggles without becoming burdensome. This modeling shows them possibilities for their own emotional expression that don't threaten their sense of autonomy. The strategic aspect involves choosing appropriate timing, depth, and context for vulnerable sharing rather than overwhelming others with immediate complete disclosure. This demonstrates emotional intelligence and consideration that avoidants respect and find attractive. They see someone who trusts them with their vulnerabilities gradually rather than dumping everything at once. Vulnerability paired with strength also creates intrigue and admiration that keeps avoidants engaged rather than overwhelmed. They become curious about someone who can handle difficult emotions and experiences with grace and wisdom, wanting to understand how they've developed such emotional resilience and sophistication. Emotional consistency without neediness. Avoidants become obsessed with people who demonstrate consistent emotional availability and care without displaying neediness, desperation, or emotional volatility. This consistency provides the emotional safety and predictability that avoidants need, while avoiding the clingy or demanding behaviors that trigger their defensive withdrawal. Consistent communication involves maintaining the same warm, respectful, and thoughtful tone regardless of the avoidant's current emotional state or level of availability. It doesn't punish their withdrawal with coldness or reward their attention with excessive enthusiasm. This emotional stability creates safety for the avoidant to engage authentically without fear of managing someone else's emotional reactions. The format includes expressing care and interest without making it conditional on reciprocation or response. It demonstrates genuine care for the avoidant's well-being that exists independently of what they provide in return. This unconditional positive regard feels both foreign and irresistible to avoidants who are accustomed to relationships that feel transactional or demanding. Consistency without neediness also involves maintaining personal interests, goals, and happiness independently of the avoidant's attention or behavior. It shows someone who enjoys the avoidant's company when it's available, but doesn't require it for personal fulfillment. This independence paradoxically makes avoidants more interested and invested because they don't feel responsible for someone else's emotional well-being. The approach creates space for the avoidant to miss and appreciate the consistent care being offered rather than taking it for granted or feeling suffocated by it. When someone maintains steady, non-demanding care, it allows the avoidant to recognize its value and potentially reciprocate from genuine desire rather than obligation or pressure. Questions that invite rather than interrogate. Avoidants are captivated by people who ask questions that invite them to share and explore rather than interrogating them for information or emotional disclosure. These inviting questions create opportunities for connection and understanding without the pressure or anxiety that direct questioning often produces in avoidant personalities. Inviting questions are typically open-ended and philosophical rather than personal and direct. They might ask about perspectives on life experiences, opinions about relationship dynamics, or thoughts about personal growth, rather than specifically asking about the avoidant's feelings or experiences. This approach allows them to share as much or as little as feels comfortable while still engaging in meaningful conversation. The format includes questions that demonstrate genuine curiosity about the avoidant's thoughts and perspectives, rather than seeking specific information or emotional disclosure. These questions show interest in understanding their unique viewpoint and wisdom, rather than trying to extract personal details or emotional confessions. Inviting questions also provide multiple pathways for response, allowing the avoidant to engage at whatever level feels safe and appropriate. They can respond intellectually, emotionally, or practically without feeling like they're failing to meet expectations or provide what's being sought. The approach consistently demonstrates that the person asking questions is genuinely interested in the avoidant's thoughts and perspectives for their own value rather than as means to other ends. This authentic curiosity feels refreshing to avoidants who often feel like people are trying to fix, change, or manipulate them rather than simply understand and appreciate them. The power of implication over declaration. Avoidants become completely absorbed by communication that implies rather than declares, that suggests rather than demands, that invites interpretation rather than imposing meaning. This indirect approach appeals to their need for intellectual engagement while providing emotional depth and connection that doesn't trigger their defensive systems. Implicative communication allows avoidants to participate actively in creating meaning, rather than passively receiving it. They become collaborators in understanding rather than targets of communication, making them feel respected and valued for their intelligence and insight. This collaborative aspect creates engagement and investment that direct communication rarely achieves. The format consistently trusts the avoidant's ability to understand subtle meaning and respond appropriately, rather than assuming they need everything spelled out explicitly. This trust in their emotional and intellectual sophistication appeals to their sense of competence and makes them want to live up to the confidence being placed in them. Implication also creates ongoing mystery and depth that keeps avoidants engaged over time, rather than feeling like they've quickly understood everything there is to know. Each interaction provides new layers to discover and interpret, maintaining their interest and curiosity indefinitely. The magnetic effect of this communication style. When someone consistently communicates in this sophisticated, respectful, and subtle format, it creates an almost magnetic effect on avoidant personalities. They find themselves thinking about conversations long after they end, replaying subtle meanings and implications, feeling intellectually and emotionally stimulated in ways they rarely experience with more direct communicators. This communication style becomes addictive to avoidants because it provides everything they crave: intellectual stimulation, emotional depth, respect for their autonomy, and opportunities for genuine connection without triggering any of their defensive responses. They begin to associate this person with feelings of safety, understanding, and appreciation that they rarely experience in relationships. The magnetic effect also stems from how this communication style brings out their best qualities rather than triggering their worst defensive behaviors. They become more thoughtful, more emotionally available, more generous, and more connected when interacting with someone who communicates in this sophisticated format. Understanding this communication format provides a roadmap for creating deeper connection with avoidant personalities while respecting their psychological needs and limitations. It demonstrates that profound intimacy and emotional connection are possible with avoidants when approached through pathways that feel safe and appealing to their unique psychology. The key lies not in changing them or overcoming their defenses, but in communicating in ways that naturally invite their authentic engagement and emotional availability. Hurry!